Humanity had dreamed of the stars for centuries, and now the dream was a reality. The first intergalactic colony, Nova Terra, stood as a beacon of hope and progress, established on a planet rich with resources and potential. It was meant to be a new home, a testament to humanity's resilience and ambition. The colony was a massive undertaking, a combined effort of multiple nations and organizations sending their best scientists, engineers, and pioneers across the void to settle a world beyond the Milky Way. The journey had taken over a decade, with colony ships traveling through an experimental wormhole technology designed to bridge the vast distances between galaxies. The arrival was met with awe and celebration. Nova Terra was everything they had hoped for: oceans, forests, and an atmosphere nearly identical to Earth's. The first years were challenging, but the colony thrived. Cities rose from the wilderness, technology adapted, and humanity made its mark on a new world. But then came the first signs of something strange. It began subtly. A survey team mapping the northern regions of the continent went missing. No distress signals, no signs of struggle, just silence. Drones sent to investigate found their equipment scattered across the tundra, but no bodies, no explanation. Search parties found nothing, only eerie landscapes untouched except for the abandoned gear of the vanished team. As weeks passed, more incidents occurred. Workers disappeared from construction sites without a trace. Entire sections of infrastructure were found dismantled overnight, as if some unseen force was taking apart their progress. Surveillance footage provided no answers. Cameras showed nothing but static. During the time frames when things went missing, AI analysis detected no intruders, no ships, no evidence of an attack. The colony leadership dismissed the events as anomalies, technical malfunctions, or simple human error, but fear began to take hold among the settlers. Then came the night of the signal. It was a low-frequency transmission, not from deep space, but from beneath them, from somewhere deep under Nova Terra's surface. It was rhythmic, almost like a pulse, and it interfered with their communications. Their instruments went haywire. Colony-wide power fluctuations turned the night into a chaotic mess of failing lights and malfunctioning systems. By morning the signal stopped, but the message was clear: they were not alone on Nova Terra. The first attempt to locate the source of the signal ended in disaster. A heavily armed exploration team descended into the caverns below the colony, tunnels that had been thought to be natural formations. Their last transmission was a garbled scream, followed by silence. Drones sent after them revealed nothing. The tunnels were empty, as if the team had never existed. Panic gripped the colony. Some demanded evacuation, others insisted they had to understand what they were dealing with. A council meeting was called to determine their next course of action, but just as they began deliberations, every screen across the colony lit up with a single message written in a language no human had ever seen before. Translation AI could even begin its work. Something else happened. The colony lost power entirely. The sun was setting, and without electricity, the streets of Nova Terra were plunged into absolute darkness. Then came the sounds, a deep resonating hum reverberating through the air, followed by something even more chilling: the echo of footsteps, thousands of them marching in unison from the darkness of the wilderness toward the colony perimeter. Whatever was out there was coming closer, and humanity was about to learn the true fate of Nova Terra. The colony stood in utter darkness save for the faint glow of emergency lights running on backup power. Panic spread like wildfire as settlers rushed to arm themselves against an enemy they had yet to see. Security teams took defensive positions at key points, but without power the automated defenses were useless. The hum in the air grew louder, a rhythmic pulsing sound that seemed to vibrate through bone and steel alike. A desperate attempt was made to restore power. Engineers worked frantically to reboot the colony's energy grid, but every system refused to respond, as if something was actively preventing them from regaining control. Then the perimeter alarms triggered. The motion sensors, still operational on independent power sources, detected movement, massive amounts of movement closing in from all sides. The first attack came in the form of a sudden surge of gravity, a force so intense that it pulled several colony structures to the ground like an invisible hand pressing them into the earth. The settlers within screamed as they were crushed before anyone could react. The unseen force lifted and flung debris effortlessly, turning entire buildings into weapons. The security teams opened fire blindly at the darkness, but their weapons hit nothing tangible. The enemy remained unseen. Then the first figure emerged from the shadows, tall and slender, with elongated limbs and featureless faces. They moved like wraiths in perfect synchronization. Their bodies seemed to shift between solid and translucent, phasing in and out of existence as if reality itself was uncertain of their presence. The moment gunfire was directed at them, they vanished, reappearing behind the colonists with deadly precision. One by one soldiers fell, their bodies collapsing without visible wounds, as if life itself had been stripped away from them. Dr. Avery Carter, one of the lead xenobiologists, watched in horror from the colony's command center. She had studied countless potential alien threats, but nothing like this. No life signs, no biological markers, no heat signatures. It was as if the attackers were not creatures but something beyond comprehension, yet they had sent a message, they had communicated. Desperate to understand, she activated the emergency translation system, feeding the unknown text from the screens into the AI. As it worked, the colony continued its desperate battle. Entire sectors fell silent, overrun without a single shot fired. The colony's leaders shouted into their radios demanding to know what was happening, but the only responses were choked gasps or eerie static. Then the translation completed. The message read, "You were never meant to be here. Leave or be unmade." Dr. Carter felt ice in her veins. Whoever or whatever these entities were, they weren't just hostile, they saw humanity as an intrusion, a mistake that needed to be erased, and so far they had proven themselves capable of doing exactly that. Commander Elias Voss, leader of the security forces, made the call. Evacuation. The colony was lost, but if they moved quickly they could still save those who remained. The last operational ships were prepped for departure, while makeshift barricades were established to buy time. Yet the enemy did not rush. Instead, they moved methodically, like a force of nature reclaiming what had been disturbed. The final distress signal was sent out, a desperate cry into the void, hoping that anyone would hear them. But as the last of the colony ships prepared for launch, the hum in the air intensified. The settlers felt it in their bones, a crushing weight that forced many to their knees. The attackers did not need weapons, they were the weapon. As the first ship took off, the sky itself seemed to ripple, twisting and bending like a mirage. Then, without warning, the ship was gone, not destroyed, not shot down, simply erased, as if it had never existed. The realization hit them all at once: there would be no escape. Panic turned into sheer terror as the colony's last hope vanished before their eyes. The settlers, still on the ground, stared at the empty sky where the first ship had been just moments ago. No wreckage, no explosion, just an absence, as if the ship had never existed. The reality of their situation sank in. There was no escape. Commander Elias Voss gritted his teeth, forcing his mind to focus. He had led men into impossible situations before, but this was different. This was something beyond war, beyond any threat humanity had ever faced. He turned to Dr. Avery Carter, who was still staring at the translated message, her hands trembling. "We were never meant to be here," she whispered. "This isn't an invasion, this is something older, something that owns this place." Voss didn't have time for fear. He barked orders, ordering the remaining survivors to regroup at the underground bunkers. If they couldn't escape, they would have to hide. The problem was the enemy seemed to know their every move. As they retreated to the bunker entrances, the strange figures reappeared. They moved with unnatural grace, their elongated limbs bending in ways that defied logic. The security team opened fire once more, but it was useless. Bullets passed through them as if they were illusions. But the moment the soldiers stopped shooting, the creatures struck with terrifying precision. One moment a man was standing, the next he was gone, not dead, just erased from existence, leaving no trace behind. Dr. Carter's mind raced. This wasn't technology, this wasn't even war, it was something far worse. Something was rewriting the very fabric of reality around them. But why were these beings some kind of higher intelligence, or were they something else entirely? They reached the bunkers, sealing the doors behind them, heavy blast-proof walls designed to withstand anything humanity could throw at them. The colony's last survivors were crammed inside, breathing heavily, their eyes darting in the dim emergency lighting. The hum was still present, vibrating through the walls, but the creatures had not followed them in. For a moment, silence. Voss turned to Carter. "What are they doing?" She shook her head. "I don't think they need to attack us anymore, we're already in checkmate." Then the walls began to shift. Not break, not crack. Shift. The metal itself shimmered as if it was no longer solid reality, but something malleable. The walls wavered like liquid, and one by one people began to vanish. No screams, no struggle, just a quiet erasure of existence, like reality itself was unraveling around them. Dr. Carter's mind worked frantically. There had to be a way to understand. If they could communicate once, maybe they could do it again. Maybe they could negotiate, reason with whatever these beings were. She pulled out her tablet, quickly inputting a new message into the translation system. "We acknowledge your claim. This world belongs to you, but why are you doing this?" The system processed. The hum in the air pulsed, and then the response came. "You do not understand. This place is not a world, it is a prison, and we are its wardens." Carter's breath caught in her throat. A prison, then that meant something else was here, something that these beings were containing, something far worse. Before she could even speak her realization, the world around them twisted and went dark. The darkness was absolute. Dr. Avery Carter felt weightless, suspended in a void where time and space had no meaning. Panic surged through her veins, but there was nothing to hold on to, nothing to grasp. She wasn't falling, she wasn't floating, she simply was. Then suddenly she was somewhere else. A vast endless expanse stretched before her. It wasn't a place in the conventional sense, it was a concept, a shifting reality where structures of impossible geometry folded and unfolded around her. Her mind rebelled against what she was seeing, but something deeper within her understood she wasn't meant to comprehend this space, yet here she was. A presence made itself known. It wasn't one of the beings that had attacked the colony, it was something else, something vast, something ancient. It didn't speak with words, it didn't need to. She saw. Nova Terra wasn't a planet, it had never been a planet, it was a construct, a prison designed to hold something beyond human understanding, something that had been sealed away long before humanity even existed. The beings that had wiped out the colony were not invaders, they were guardians, custodians of this cosmic cage tasked with ensuring that whatever was contained within never escaped. And humanity in its ignorance had disturbed the seal. The presence focused on her now, its will pressing against her mind, pushing knowledge into her thoughts like a flood. It showed her glimpses of the entity imprisoned here, a force not bound by physics and not limited by time or dimension, something that had once devoured entire star systems before it was finally subdued and locked away. Nova Terra had been built around it, layer upon layer of containment mechanisms, all woven into the very fabric of reality itself. And humanity had torn those mechanisms apart without even knowing. She felt sick. The colonies mining the construction, the technology, they had unknowingly dismantled the very locks keeping this thing restrained. Every missing worker, every unexplained event, every distortion was a symptom of the seal weakening. The presence withdrew, leaving her with a final revelation. Humanity had already lost. When she opened her eyes, she was back in the bunker. The world around her was still shifting, breaking down. The remaining survivors stood frozen, eyes wide with terror as the last remnants of the colony dissolved into nothingness. Commander Voss grabbed her shoulder, snapping her back to the moment. Carter, what the hell is happening? She looked at him, and for the first time in her life she had no answer. Then the bunker simply ceased to exist. The survivors were no longer in the bunker. They weren't anywhere. The ground beneath them, the walls around them, even the air, they all seemed to have vanished. Reality itself was unraveling in front of them. It wasn't like being in space, where one could still breathe in the vacuum. It was as if existence itself was being wiped clean. The very laws of physics, of time and space, were breaking down. Commander Voss reached out, his hand passing through empty air where the walls had once stood. His eyes flickered with panic as he turned in a circle, trying to make sense of the world, no, the lack of a world, around them. We're not dead, Voss muttered to himself. It wasn't a question but a desperate affirmation. Yet, there was no certainty in his voice. Dr. Carter stood motionless, her mind still reeling from the revelation she'd received in the dark void. The prison. The entity. The destruction of Nova Terra. They had triggered the unraveling of everything. But why weren't they dead? Why hadn't they been erased like the others? Her thoughts were interrupted by a voice, a soft whisper that echoed through the void, as if the very air was trying to speak to them. You have entered the space between spaces. The words rippled through their minds, not spoken aloud but felt, as if something immense was attempting to communicate with them through the very fabric of their consciousness. Who are you? Carter's voice cracked, but there was no response. Instead, the whisper continued, and now the survivors could feel it, a presence moving around them, though they saw nothing. We are the wardens. We are the keepers. The entity is locked within its prison, and you, humans, are the unwitting catalysts of its undoing. Dr. Carter shuddered, her thoughts spinning in a whirlwind of fear and understanding. The wardens weren't just the guardians of Nova Terra, they were the cosmic forces holding back something beyond the reckoning of mortal minds. But what were they doing here, in the space between dimensions, with the last of the survivors? Why hadn't they erased them? The answer came in the form of a sharp pulse of energy, a resonance that vibrated through their bones, through their very souls. You are a mistake, but you are not beyond saving. You may still choose your path, though your fate is already sealed. The entity cannot be allowed to escape, or all that you know will cease to exist. Voss clenched his fists, his eyes burning with a mixture of defiance and dread. So, what do we do? Sit here and wait for our destruction? He growled, his voice laced with frustration. The presence responded once again, the weight of its words pressing down on them all. Asterisk, you must correct your error. The entity must be returned to its prison before it breaks free. Only then will your existence be preserved. You are the last witnesses to the undoing of reality itself. The choice is yours, asterisk. Carter's heart pounded as the truth of the situation became clearer. The entity was not just a force of destruction, it was a force of change, of total transformation. If it broke free, the universe as they knew it would cease to exist, torn apart by the cosmic entity that had once consumed entire galaxies. But could they really stop it? Could they somehow find a way to undo the damage humanity had caused? She felt her resolve harden. There was no time to waste. The future of everything was at stake, and their only hope was to return to Nova Terra, to the very heart of the prison, and find a way to repair the seals that had been broken. But how? And what would they be facing when they got there? The entity was no longer just a distant threat, it was already stirring, already stretching out its influence, unraveling the very fabric of the colony and their reality. They had been given a chance, but only one. There would be no second chances. As the survivors stood frozen in the void, waiting for the next move, Carter made a decision. She turned to Commander Voss, her voice steady despite the uncertainty in her heart. "We go back," she said, her eyes blazing with determination. "We find a way to fix this. We stop it." Voss nodded, though his eyes were filled with apprehension. There was no turning back now. But as they prepared to move, the air around them thickened once again, and the void seemed to pulse with an ominous energy, as if even the universe itself was holding its breath. The entity was awake. And it was waiting. They weren't in the void anymore. The moment they made the decision to return, the fabric of reality warped once more, snapping back into place like a rubber band. For a brief second, Carter thought she might lose her sense of self again, but then the weight of the world settled around her, though the world felt wrong. Nova Terra. Or what was left of it. The colony was a shadow of what it had once been. The great structures that had once stood proud now lay in ruins, crumbling to dust as if the very foundation of existence had been eaten away. The air was thick with a kind of heaviness, as if the planet itself was suffocating. A deep, unsettling silence hung over everything, broken only by the occasional tremor or distant rumble. The entity was close. Carter could feel it in her bones. Commander Voss gripped his rifle tightly, his eyes scanning the desolate landscape. "This place, it's falling apart." Carter nodded grimly, her mind racing. "It's not just the colony. It's everything. The entire planet is destabilizing. The entity is waking up, slowly, but it's happening." She turned her gaze toward the horizon, where a dark storm was brewing, its clouds swirling unnaturally. "If we don't fix the seals, everything will be undone." They moved quickly, taking what cover they could find as they headed toward the heart of the colony. The power plant, the central hub of Nova Terra, was the likely location of the containment mechanisms, if they were still there. But Carter had no illusions. The entity had been manipulating this place for far longer than humanity had known. They were walking into the very maw of destruction. Suddenly, the ground shook violently beneath them, sending Carter sprawling to the ground. Voss caught her arm, pulling her to her feet. They looked around, the air humming with a deep, ominous resonance. The presence, the wardens, were watching them, but it was as if their influence had faded. The entity's power was growing stronger by the second, drowning out the cosmic warden's influence. Then they saw it. A figure. Tall, shifting in and out of existence like a ripple in space. It moved toward them with an unsettling, otherworldly grace, its features impossible to focus on. It wasn't like the wraith-like beings they had encountered before. This presence felt far more profound. Carter's heart pounded. The entity was here. "Stay back," Voss ordered, aiming his rifle at the figure, but his hands shook. He knew it was futile. Nothing could stop this thing. The figure stopped a mere few feet away from them, its form flickering like a mirage. It didn't speak, but Carter felt its presence in her mind, an oppressive force that made her want to curl into herself. Asterisk, you cannot stop this. You cannot fix what you have broken, asterisk. She swallowed hard, her mind scrambling for words. We didn't know. We had no idea what we were doing. Asterisk, ignorance is no excuse. Your kind has always been a threat. But you are not beyond saving. Yet it is not your choice anymore, asterisk. The figure's presence seemed to grow, its power pushing against them, dragging at their very souls. The entity will awaken, and you will not stop it. Voss stepped forward, defiant. We don't have a choice. We came here to fix this. The figure's form shifted, distorting as if it were made of liquid and light. Asterisk, the path you walk now is one of your making. You will see the truth soon enough. And then, you will understand, asterisk. With a final surge of power, the figure flickered and disappeared, leaving behind a silence that was even more suffocating than before. Carter felt her legs weaken, the weight of the situation pressing down on her like a physical force. But there was no time to dwell on it. The entity was close, she could feel its power crawling beneath the surface of the planet, like an awakening beast stirring from its slumber. We have to get to the power plant, she said, her voice determined despite the crushing fear in her chest. It's our only chance. Voss nodded, his eyes steely with resolve. Let's move. They pressed on, the desolation around them growing more pronounced with every step. The colony, what was left of it, felt like a mausoleum, a place where time itself had been distorted beyond recognition. And the entity's influence was spreading, like ink blurring the lines of a page. Finally, they reached the heart of the colony, the power plant. The entrance was blocked, the metal twisted and torn as if something had forced its way through. Carter forced her way inside, and the air inside felt charged, thick with unnatural energy. The containment mechanisms were still here, but they had been weakened, the protective fields flickering erratically. The entity was no longer bound by the physical world. It was beginning to spread beyond the prison that had held it for so long. There's no time, Carter muttered. We have to stabilize the seals. If we don't, it will be over. Voss stepped forward, his voice steady. Then let's get to work. And together, they began their final attempt to seal away the entity, knowing that even if they succeeded, the price of their mistake would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The power plant's interior felt like a hollowed-out carcass, its once sophisticated technology now little more than broken machinery and shattered remnants. The air crackled with a static hum, a constant reminder of the entity's growing influence, warping everything around them. The walls flickered, distorting like a fevered dream, reality itself unraveling at the edges. Carter's fingers shook as she moved through the debris, her mind focused on the task at hand. The containment seals, the only thing standing between the entity's release and the total destruction of everything, had to be restored. Voss stood by, his weapon still gripped tightly in his hands, but his eyes were scanning every inch of the room. There was no sign of the wraith-like figures, no sign of the entity itself, but the oppressive weight of its presence pressed down on them from all directions. They knew it was only a matter of time before it manifested again. Carter, hurry, Voss urged, his voice strained. Whatever we're doing, we don't have long. I know, she replied, her voice tense. She had reached the central terminal, the one place in the plant where the original containment system had been set up. The screens were blank, glitching, showing corrupted code, but she could still make out traces of the original encryption, enough to work with. Her fingers flew across the console, trying to restore the damaged protocols, but the system was resisting her every move. Every attempt she made was met with a flicker of interference, as if the entity itself was fighting back. Then, she saw it, one of the seals, a physical manifestation of light and energy, flickering like a dying star. The seal was failing, its protective field collapsing under the entity's growing power. She reached for the override controls, but before she could engage them, the room trembled. The ground shook violently, sending Carter sprawling to the floor. Voss grabbed her arm, pulling her to her feet, but the tremor didn't stop. Instead, it escalated. The power plant's walls groaned and buckled under the pressure, twisting and warping, as if the very structure was being torn apart by invisible hands. And then, in the center of the room, it appeared. The entity. It materialized out of the air, a shimmering distortion that defied all logic. It was not a creature in the traditional sense, it was an impossibility, an entity of pure energy and will, a being that existed outside the confines of time and space. It had no shape, no form, just an endless, ever-shifting mass of light and darkness, of contradictions. It was everything and nothing, a force beyond comprehension. Carter could feel its presence flooding her mind, pushing against her thoughts, drowning her in an overwhelming sense of hopelessness. The entity's power surged, and the last of the containment seals began to flicker out entirely, the protective barriers weakening with each passing second. "This is it," Voss muttered, his voice thick with despair. "We're too late." "No," Carter gasped, forcing herself to her feet. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her mind remained focused. "We can still fix it. We can still." Before she could finish, the entity's presence surged forward. A wave of psychic energy slammed into her, knocking her backward. She gasped, her vision swimming as the very air around her seemed to bend and twist, the world blurring into chaos. The entity's voice filled her mind, if it could even be called a voice. It wasn't a sound. It was a sensation, a crushing weight pressing down on her thoughts. "You cannot contain me. You cannot bind me. You cannot stop what is inevitable, ". Carter fought to regain control, her hands shaking as she reached for the console. She had to finish the work. She had to restore the seals. But the entity's power was overwhelming, pushing against her, blocking her every effort. Then she felt a surge of energy, not from her own body, but from somewhere deeper, somewhere primal. It was the presence of the wardens, the guardians who had once protected the seals. Though they had been silent, though their influence had diminished, they had not abandoned them completely. With the warden's energy flooding her mind, Carter understood. There was one way to stop the entity, one final option. She could not just contain it. She had to reverse the process, rebind it to its prison. But it would require a sacrifice. "Voss!" Carter shouted, her voice hoarse. "I need you to help me. We can still do this, but you have to trust me." Voss looked at her, his face a mixture of fear and determination. "What do we need to do?" "We have to use the remaining power to restart the core system," Carter explained. "It'll overload the entity's influence and send it back into its prison. But we have to remain here. We can't leave." Voss's eyes widened, and for a brief moment, there was silence between them. Then he nodded, the weight of the decision clear in his eyes. "Let's do it." Together, they worked quickly, activating the override and redirecting all the remaining power into the core system. The entity screamed, a wave of energy crashing against them, but they held firm, channeling everything they had into the system. The last of the seals began to hum, its energy flaring up as the core's power surged. And then, with a final burst of light, the entity was gone. The room fell silent. For a moment, Carter wasn't sure if she was alive. The air around them was still. The tremors had ceased. Nova Terra, or what was left of it, felt still as a graveyard. But the entity was no longer here. Voss collapsed to his knees, exhaustion written across his face. Carter stood on shaky legs, her body aching, but she knew one thing for certain. They had done it. They had stopped it. But at what cost? The silence that followed was deafening. Nova Terra was no more than a hollow shell of what it had once been. The colony was gone, and humanity's legacy on this planet had ended in ruin. Yet Carter felt a strange sense of relief, tempered with the knowledge that their actions had prevented something far worse, something beyond even the entity itself. And as they walked away, leaving the shattered remnants of their world behind, they knew one thing above all: humanity had made its mark. It had faced the impossible, and it had survived. For now.